Not long ago, we were packing our car for a long trip, and some of the items we were packing in the car were very fragile. They were these very large glass containers that we were going to be using for a wedding. And we wanted to make sure that they were packed very securely. So we packed them with, we cushioned them with soft items and filled them with soft items. And we kept asking ourselves, do you think that's enough? Do you think they're secure? Do you think they're safe? And you didn't want to fill them too tightly, because then they would be like, it would be, then one little shift of the car might cause the glass to shatter. But they want to be tightly enough that if they moved a little bit, they'd be okay. But the question of when is something that's vulnerable to breaking safe is a question that we're all familiar with, sometimes with transporting pieces of glass or other breakable or valuable items, but sometimes when it comes to us too. We are vulnerable. We are vulnerable to breaking, vulnerable to broken hearts, vulnerable to guilt overwhelming us, vulnerable to being overwhelmed by the details of life and everything that needs to get figured out, and then the extra surprises that come along the way. We're vulnerable to how people treat us when they treat us poorly or when they're nasty to us, and just we're vulnerable to all of those things, and we are so vulnerable that we can get to a point where we break. Maybe you have broken in the past, or maybe you know somebody who has broken, and sometimes those are hard breaks to recover from. So when can we know that our vulnerable selves are safe? And how do we do that? That's a question that Psalm 25 answers just in the first two lines. In the first two lines it says, "To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. In you I trust, O my God." Our soul is the most vulnerable part of who we are. It is who we are. The deepest parts of our feelings, the deepest emotions that we feel, the most hidden thoughts that we have, everything. When something rattles our soul, it rattles our whole being, and we can feel vulnerable. And the key to finding security and safety in that vulnerability, which happens regularly, is really in the first two words of Psalm 25. To you. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. And who is the to you? What is something that would sufficiently describe the you that we are talking about there? There's so many places in Scripture that we could point to. Today I'm going to point to John chapter 11. John chapter 11 is one that I think I talk about frequently on these videos. Maybe you get tired of me talking about Lazarus coming out of the grave, but there's so much there. Lazarus, at the beginning of the chapter, Jesus had been told by the sisters that Lazarus was sick. And then Jesus waits a couple of days, and then Lazarus dies. And after he dies, Jesus goes to go and see Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus. First he meets with Martha, has a conversation with her. And then he meets with Mary. After the conversation with Martha, Martha goes back to the house and says, "Mary, Jesus is looking for you." Mary comes out. And then it says that when Jesus saw Mary weeping, and the Jews who were with her also weeping, then they were around the tomb, and that's when we get the shortest passage in the English Bible, which is 2 words, Jesus wept. And so Mary's weeping, her friends are weeping, Jesus is weeping. Interestingly, in the Greek language, the language in which the New Testament was written, there are 2 different words for weep, and they're both used in those sections. One of those words is used to describe Mary and the Jews weeping, Mary and her friends. And that would be the normal type of weeping that you would have at a funeral, that you would expect. The expected type of weeping when something sad happens. But there's a different word that's used for Jesus weeping. And the word that's used for Jesus weeping means something different. It means the type of weeping that you don't expect, where suddenly you are overcome by emotions you didn't see coming, and you can't help but burst out into tears. And that's what Jesus did. Even Jesus was surprised by how much life can hurt sometimes. As he looked at his friends, as he looked at death, even Jesus was surprised. And then, of course, that Jesus who was surprised and who wept right alongside Mary and Martha and all of them, he went and he showed that he was more powerful than death by bringing Lazarus out of the grave. And that, my friends, is the you in that phrase, "To you we lift up our soul." Somebody who knows how you feel, somebody who knows that sometimes life surprises us, someone who himself was surprised by the hardness of life, but who still remained powerful over all of it. and someone who still remained focused on making sure that you would have a way eventually out of it. That's the to you. My wife and I were reading a devotion the other morning, and there was a phrase that was used in that devotion that's really stuck with us. It's the phrase, Jesus has earned our trust. There are some things we don't know about Jesus, some things we don't understand, some very big questions we might have, but looking at the cross of Jesus, looking at his attention to the people he interacted with, looking at his heart, looking at his sacrifice, looking at what he gave us freely, completely, willingly, lovingly, looking at his wounds, we know this about him. We can trust him with our vulnerabilities. All of them. So give your vulnerabilities to him. Tell him where you feel vulnerable. And then remind him, not that he's forgotten, but remind him how he feels about you, that he loves you. That is what started off the whole thing with Lazarus. At the beginning of John 11, Mary and Martha sent a message to Jesus. And the message was simply this: the one you love is sick. They communicated the need, and they reminded Jesus how he felt about him, how they knew he felt about him. Maybe do that as you drift off to bed tonight. Tell Jesus your needs or the needs of people you love. And remind Jesus how he feels about them. And by doing that, you'll remember too that he loves you. And your vulnerable life is always safe with him. Rest well tonight, my friends.